My name is Adrienne Cole. I'm 28 years old. And on what was supposed to be my wedding day, I stood in a bridal suite holding the remnants of a dress that had taken me 8 months to pay for, staring at 3 feet of torn ivory silk on the floor. And I made a decision that changed everything. Not about the dress. About the man standing in the doorway making excuses for the woman who had destroyed it. That was the moment, not the dress. The excuses. Because the dress I could grieve. The dress was fabric and thread and money I had saved $12 at a time from a job I was proud of. But the excuses, those I had heard before. I had been hearing them for 2 years, in every form, at every volume, in every room I had ever been in with that family. And standing there in the ruins of the most important dress I had ever owned, I finally understood that the excuses were never going to stop. Not in 1 year, not in 10, not ever. So I made a different choice. And then I made sure that everyone who needed to know the truth about Margaret Harlow knew it. Before I tell you how this ends, take a moment to like this video if you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to welcome you. Subscribe if you want to hear more. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Because the dress was not where this story started. It started much earlier. It started the first evening I walked into the Harlow house, and Margaret looked me up and down and smiled in a way that had nothing warm in it at all. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, middle of 3 kids. My father taught high school history for 30 years. My mother managed the office at a pediatric clinic. We weren't wealthy. We were comfortable in the way that means you never went without the important things, but you understood from an early age that money required attention. I studied communications at Ohio State. Graduated, moved to Columbus, got a job at a mid-size marketing agency, worked my way up to account manager by 23. I was good at my job. I liked my job. I had a 1-bedroom apartment I'd furnished slowly and deliberately, and a small group of friends I trusted completely. I was 25 when I met Daniel Harlow at a colleague's birthday dinner. He was at the next table. He leaned over to ask if we'd ordered the lamb because he'd been debating it for 10 minutes and needed external validation. We had. It was good. We talked for 2 hours. He was funny and attentive and genuinely curious about things. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered details. On our 3rd date, he referenced something I'd mentioned briefly on the first, and I thought, this one pays attention. Daniel was a commercial architect, good firm, downtown. He was close with his family, which he mentioned early and often, his mother in particular. She's particular, he said once, early on, with a slight smile that I read as affectionate exasperation. But she means well. I remember those words exactly. She means well. I would think about them many times over the next 2 years. I met Margaret Harlow 6 weeks into dating Daniel. Dinner at the family home in Upper Arlington. 4 bedrooms, a circular driveway, a kitchen that had been professionally renovated twice in the last decade. The kind of house that communicates wealth without announcing it. Mature landscaping, monogram towels in the powder room. Margaret was 61, slim. Immaculate in the way that requires daily maintenance and significant resources. Her hair was the kind of blonde that comes from an expensive colorist. She wore a cream cashmere sweater and small gold earrings, and she shook my hand with both of hers, the way people do when they want to appear warm while they're actually assessing you. Adrienne, she said. What a pretty name. Where is it from? I don't actually know, I said. My parents just liked it. She smiled. Of course, 2 words, completely neutral. And yet, I filed it. Dinner was her husband Gerald, who was quiet and pleasant, and asked me about my work with genuine interest. Daniel's younger sister Paige, who was funny and easy, and immediately felt like someone I could be friends with. And Margaret, who asked questions that were technically polite but carried something underneath them that I couldn't quite name yet. What does your father do? How long have you been at the agency? Do you own or rent? Are you close with your family? Not hostile, just thorough. The way someone takes inventory of a situation they're not sure about yet. On the drive home, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. She liked you, he said. I smiled and said I was glad. and looked out the window and thought about the two words. Of course. And the way she had said them. The second time I understood what I was dealing with was 4 months in, at a family birthday party for Gerald. Backyard gathering, 20 or so people. Catered food in chafing dishes on long tables. I had brought flowers, nice ones, peonies, because I'd asked Daniel what his mother liked and he'd said she loves peonies. She accepted them with both hands and thanked me genuinely enough. Then she turned to the woman standing beside her, a neighbor named Carol, and said, without lowering her voice, "She's sweet." A little rough around the edges, but Daniel always did have a soft spot for strays. Carol looked at me. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I stood there, holding my white wine, and processed what I had just heard. A stray. She had called me a stray. To another person. While I was standing within earshot, I looked for Daniel. He was across the yard talking to his uncle. He hadn't heard. I went to find Paige. I told Daniel that night in the car on the way home, calmly, factually. She said this, to this person, while I was standing there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom doesn't always think before she speaks. It's not personal, Adrian. She does it with everyone. She doesn't do it with Carol," I said. Carol has known her for 20 years. So the solution is to wait 20 years? He took his hand off the wheel and put it over mine. Baby. She's 60 years old. She's set in her ways. She grew up in a certain world and she has a certain way of seeing things. It's not going to change overnight, but it's also not malicious. She's not trying to hurt you. She takes time. I looked at his profile in the dark of the car. The gentle reasonableness of it. The certainty that this was a fixable thing. A time problem, not a character problem. I wanted him to be right. I chose to believe he might be right. That was a choice I made many times over the next 18 months. Choosing to believe that time was the variable, that patience was the answer, that the problem was unfamiliarity and not something older and harder than that. There were other moments. I want to walk you through a few because I think it's important to understand that what happened on our wedding day did not come from nowhere. It was the end of a very long road that I had been walking with my eyes mostly open and my mouth mostly shut. Thanksgiving, our first one together. I had offered to bring a dessert. I made my grandmother's apple cake, a recipe that required 3 hours and specific technique, and that I had been making since I was 14. Daniel loved it. Paige asked for the recipe on the spot. Margaret took one bite and said, "It's interesting. I usually find apple desserts a bit heavy for the holidays, but it's a nice effort." Nice effort. Like a child had drawn her a picture. Daniel said, "Mom, it's delicious." She smiled at him and changed the subject. Christmas, same year. Gift exchange. I had found, after considerable research and several conversations with Paige about her mother's taste, a first edition of a book Margaret had mentioned loving. A memoir by a woman she had quoted twice at dinner. I had paid $300 for it, which was more than I should have spent, but I wanted to get it right. She opened it, looked at it, said, "Oh, how thoughtful. I think I already have this somewhere, but I'll find a place for it." She didn't have it. I knew she didn't have it because I had asked Paige specifically to check. "I think I already have this somewhere." Daniel said, "That's a first edition, Mom." She said, "Is it really? How interesting," and set it aside. I looked at Daniel. He gave me a small, apologetic smile that I was beginning to understand was its own kind of problem. The dinner party incident was the worst before the wedding. 8 months before we got engaged, Margaret hosted a dinner for a group of her friends from the country club, 12 people around a formal table, and Daniel and I were included. I wore a navy dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, well-fitted, appropriate, the kind of thing I had seen women like Margaret wear in exactly these situations. She opened the door when we arrived, and her eyes went to my dress, and she said, in front of everyone in the foyer, "Adrian, how brave of you to wear that color. Not everyone can pull off that shade of blue. You need very specific coloring." 12 people in earshot. Daniel right beside me. He laughed, softly. Then he leaned in and whispered, "She means it as a compliment. Blue is her least favorite color. She's saying, you pull it off." He believed this. He genuinely believed this. I smiled and walked into the dinner party and spent the next 3 hours being gracious and articulate and completely invisible, in the way that Margaret had perfected the art of making me. On the drive home, he said, "You were wonderful tonight. She loves you more every time." I said nothing. I had started keeping a list, not a formal one. Just a mental catalog of moments, filed and dated. The stray comment, the apple cake, the first edition, the brave of you. I kept it not out of bitterness, but out of a need to trust my own perception. Because Daniel was so consistently, genuinely certain that his mother meant well, that I had begun to doubt what I was hearing. The list kept me honest. He proposed in March. His grandmother's ring, a round diamond in a platinum setting, quiet and beautiful and real. We were in the apartment I'd lived in for 3 years. Takeout containers on the coffee table, some documentary playing on television, and he got down on one knee between the couch and the table and said he couldn't imagine the rest of his life without me. I said yes. I said yes because I loved him. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely loved Daniel Harlow. His attention, his curiosity, his humor, the way he moved through the world with a kind of easy generosity that I had not found easily before. I loved him. What I did not love was the part of him that could not see his mother clearly. But I had told myself, as people in love often do, that love was enough to work around the parts that weren't perfect. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. We told his family over dinner the following weekend. Gerald hugged me warmly and called me his future daughter-in-law and meant it. Paige screamed and grabbed my hand to look at the ring and already started talking about dresses. Margaret stood up from the table and embraced Daniel for a long time, and then she turned to me and took my hands and said, "Welcome to the family, Adrian." She said it the way you say something you have been coached to say. Technically correct, perfectly delivered. I said thank you, and smiled, and the list in my head added one more item. The dress. Let me tell you about the dress. I had known what I wanted before I ever walked into a bridal salon. Not a specific designer or a specific style, but a feeling. I wanted something that felt like me, simple and clean, and not trying too hard. I had spent my life watching women in Margaret's world perform elegance as a status symbol, and I wanted the opposite of that. I wanted a dress that was beautiful because it was honest. I found it on a Saturday in September, 4 months after the engagement, at a small bridal boutique on 5th Street that a college friend had recommended. Off the beaten path. Not the places Margaret had suggested, the designers her friends had used, the Columbus boutique she had sent me the Instagram page for twice. The dress was ivory silk, with a simple A-line silhouette. Cap sleeves, a low open back, modest but beautiful, a small train, nothing theatrical. It had a quality of light to it, the way real silk does when it moves, that no photograph captured properly. I put it on and stood in front of the mirror, and I did not need anyone's opinion. It was mine. I knew it immediately. It cost $2,800, more than I had planned. I had been setting aside money since the engagement, and I was $400 short. I transferred from savings. I did not ask Daniel or his family for a contribution. It was mine, and I wanted to own it completely. I told Daniel that evening. He asked if he could see a picture. I said, no. Tradition. He laughed and said he couldn't wait. The problem came 3 weeks later when Margaret called Daniel to ask about the dress, and he, because he had no sense of how loaded this particular question was, told her where I'd gotten it and approximately what it looked like. She called me the next day. "I heard you found something," she said, "at a boutique on 5th Street. I did. Yes. I love it." A pause. The kind she was very good at. The kind that communicated more than words. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "that before you commit fully, you might consider looking at 1 or 2 other options. I have a relationship with Elaine's Bridal in Dublin. They've done dresses for several women in our circle. Really exquisite work. The quality is exceptional." "My dress has exceptional quality," I said. "I'm sure it's lovely." I just think for a wedding like Daniel's, for the venue, the guest list, you want something that speaks to the occasion, you know? Something with a bit more presence. More presence. There it was. Your dress is nice, but it's not enough. You are nice, but you're not enough. The occasion deserves more than what you have chosen. I held the phone and breathed for a moment. I appreciate the suggestion, I said. But I've made my decision. Another pause. Well, she said, you're the bride. And she hung up. I sat on my bed for a long time after that call. I thought about calling Daniel. I thought about what he would say. Mom just wants the best for the wedding. She has more experience with these kinds of events. She means well. I didn't call Daniel. I called the boutique and paid the remaining balance on my dress. It was mine. All the way mine. That was the first time I had refused Margaret Harlow anything she had indicated she wanted. I did not understand then how much she would make me pay for it. Before I tell you what happened on the wedding day, I want to stop here for a moment. Because I think some of you watching this right now have a Margaret in your life. Maybe she's a mother-in-law. Maybe she's someone else. But you know the particular experience of being in a room with someone who makes you feel subtly, consistently, artfully small, who never does anything you could point to clearly and call wrong, who is always technically polite, whose cruelty is so refined that the person you love most looks at you when you describe it and says, "Are you sure that's what she meant?" If you know that room, type "I know that room" in the comments. And if you want to know what happened when Margaret Harlow finally did something I could point to clearly, make sure you're subscribed. Because what she did on my wedding day was no longer subtle. The wedding was on a Saturday in June. The venue was a restored estate outside Columbus. Stone walls, a garden ceremony space, an indoor reception hall with high ceilings and long windows. It was beautiful in a way that required nothing added to it. We had kept the decor simple. Cream flowers, candlelight, a string quartet for the ceremony, a DJ for the reception, 210 guests. His side considerably larger than mine because the Harlow social universe was considerable and Margaret had, over the planning process, expanded the guest list 3 times, citing family obligations and social courtesies, and one memorable phrase. Daniel's wedding is not the occasion for a small gathering. It was not Daniel's wedding. It was our wedding. But I had learned which battles were worth fighting, and the guest list had not felt like the right one at the time. I arrived at the venue at 9 in the morning with my mother, my maid of honor Jess, and 2 other bridesmaids. The ceremony wasn't until 3. We had the bridal suite for the day, a large bright room on the 2nd floor with a row of mirrors and a vanity, and windows overlooking the garden. My dress was hanging in its garment bag on the back of the door when I arrived. We did hair and makeup. We drank champagne, 1 glass each, carefully, because Jess had a rule about bridesmaids and champagne before noon that she enforced without apology. We ate the breakfast my mother had brought in a cooler, fruit and small sandwiches, and the chocolate chip cookies she made for every important occasion in my life, going back to the 3rd grade. At 11:30, Margaret came to the bridal suite. She knocked. My mother opened the door. Margaret stepped in wearing a deep burgundy dress, pearl earrings, hair done, and she surveyed the room with the familiar air of someone assessing whether things were being managed to the appropriate standard. She hugged me carefully, not to disturb my hair. She told me I looked beautiful. She said the venue was stunning. She asked about the timeline for the ceremony, and I told her, and she nodded. Then she looked at the garment bag on the back of the door. "Is that the dress?" she said. I said yes. She smiled. "Well, we'll see." My mother, who had been listening quietly to every Margaret interaction for 2 years and had never once said a word out of respect for my choices, looked at me with an expression that said very clearly, "I am still not saying a word, but I want you to know I am cataloging this." Margaret left 20 minutes later. I should have locked the door after her. I didn't. At 12:45, Jess went downstairs to coordinate something with the venue coordinator. My mother stepped out to take a call from my father, who was running slightly late from the hotel. The other bridesmaids were in the adjacent room getting into their dresses. I was alone in the bridal suite for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because Jess was back at 12:56 and what she walked into had happened in the space between. When she opened the door, I was standing in the middle of the room. The garment bag was on the floor, open. My dress was on the floor beside it, or what remained of my dress. The back seam had been torn open from the mid-back to the hem, a long, clean separation that had required force and intention. The left cap sleeve had been pulled from the bodice, hanging by threads. A dark stain, wine or something similar, spread across the front panel of the skirt, roughly the size of a dinner plate. I was looking at it. I was not crying. I was not speaking. I was standing in the middle of a room in my robe, looking at $2,800 and 8 months of anticipation on the floor. Jess came to stand beside me. She said, "Oh my God." I said, "She was the only one up here alone." Jess said, "Adrian, I know." I said, "I want to stop and be honest with you about the next 15 minutes, because they were not composed. They were not strategic. They were the 15 minutes of a person who has just seen something destroyed that mattered to her enormously and who is trying to hold herself together in a room that suddenly feels very small." My mother came back. She saw the dress. She made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a gasp and the beginning of a word she didn't finish. She put her arms around me, and I let her for exactly 1 minute, and then I stepped back because I needed to think. Jess was already on her phone. She had a contact, she said. A bridal emergency service she had actually looked up after a wedding she attended 3 years ago, where something similar, though not this deliberate, had happened. She was talking fast and quietly in the corner. My mother had picked up the dress carefully, the way you handle something injured, and was examining the damage with the focus of someone assessing what could be saved. "The stain is the problem," she said. "The tear, I can work with, but the stain." She had been sewing since before I was born. She knew what she was looking at. I went to find Daniel. He was in the groom's suite on the opposite side of the building, 2 floors down. I knocked, and his best man, Marcus, opened the door with the particular expression of a man who was expecting something bad and had been right. "I need to talk to Daniel. Alone." Daniel came into the hallway. He was half-dressed, shirt on but not tucked, tie in his hand. He looked at my face. "What happened?" I told him. Calmly. Completely. The dress on the floor, the torn seam, the stain. "Your mother was the only person in that room alone during that window." He was quiet for a moment. "Adrian." His voice was careful in the way that I now recognized as the precursor to something I didn't want to hear. "You don't know it was her. She was the only person up there. You don't know that for certain. Jess was up there. The venue staff could have." "Daniel." He stopped. I looked at him in the hallway of a venue where 210 people were waiting for a wedding. I looked at the man who had said she means well 200 times over 2 years, who had called it not malicious when she called me a stray, who had smiled apologetically and explained her away at every single turn. "Is there any version of this," I said, "where you actually believe she didn't do it?" He didn't answer immediately. And in the space of that pause, something that had been bending for a long time finally broke. "I just think," he said slowly, "that accusing my mother of something like this on our wedding day, without proof." He ran a hand through his hair. "She wouldn't do something like this. She has her issues, I know that, but this is extreme. She called me a stray. At your father's birthday party. That was a long time ago. She told her friends at the country club dinner I had the wrong coloring for my dress. She's critical, Adrian. She's always been critical. That doesn't mean..." She told me she was sure my dress was lovely, but it lacked presence. 3 weeks after I bought it, and now the dress is on the floor of the bridal suite in 3 pieces. He was quiet again. "I need you to hear me right now," I said. "Not to explain, not to contextualize. I need you to just hear what I'm telling you and decide what you believe." He looked at me. "I believe you're upset," he said. "I believe the dress is damaged. I believe this is terrible timing and I want to fix it. But I cannot stand here and tell you my mother walked into your bridal suite and deliberately destroyed your dress without any evidence. I can't do that. I looked at him for a long time. Okay, I said. We can still get married today, he said quickly. We can figure out the dress. Jess is on it, right? We can. I've been figuring it out, I said, for 2 years. Every time she made me feel invisible, you explained her. Every time she said something that would have been unacceptable from anyone else, you told me she meant well. And now I'm standing in a hallway in my robe on my wedding day and you're still doing it. His face changed. That's not fair. It's the most accurate thing I've said to you in months. I walked back upstairs. Jess had done something extraordinary in the time I'd been gone. The bridal emergency contact had connected her to an alteration specialist 40 minutes away, who, for a significant sum that Jess paid on her own card without asking me, was on their way. The stain, it turned out, could be treated with something specific that the specialist had. The tear could be closed, not invisibly, but well enough. My mother had been downstairs. I asked Jess where she went. Jess's expression answered before she did. She went to talk to Margaret. My mother came back 20 minutes later. She sat down beside me and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she denied it, of course, but I want to tell you something. While I was downstairs, I talked to 3 people who heard her. I looked at her. She told 2 women at the cocktail hour setup, Carol and another woman named Diane, that your dress was from a bargain boutique and that it showed. She said Daniel deserved a bride who understood the occasion. She said. Her voice was steady and careful. She said she was disappointed in the woman her son had chosen. In those words, Carol looked very uncomfortable. I think Carol has a conscience. I got the impression this was not the first conversation like this she has witnessed. I sat with that. She also, my mother continued, apparently told Gerald that you had been cold to her throughout the engagement. That you had rejected all of her suggestions and made her feel unwelcome in the planning. Gerald was quiet about it. I don't think he believed it. But she said it. The alteration specialist arrived 40 minutes later. She worked for 2 hours with focus and skill and the quiet professionalism of someone who had seen wedding day disasters before and had made a practice of not asking questions. When she was done, the dress was wearable. The stain had faded to nearly nothing. The seam was closed. The sleeve was reattached. It was not what it had been. I knew that when I put it on. There was a slight difference in the fall of the skirt at the back, where the repair was. Something only I would notice because I had tried it on enough times to know exactly how it was supposed to move. But it was mine. Still mine. She hadn't managed to take it completely. I stood in front of the mirror. My mother stood behind me. Our eyes met in the reflection. What do you want to do? She said. I want to go downstairs, I said. But not to get married. She nodded once. Then I want to tell you something, she said, about Margaret, and about what I think we should do after today. I turned around, and my mother, who had watched 2 years of this with her mouth closed out of respect for my choices, told me what she had in mind. I want to stop here. I know you want to know what happened downstairs, and I will tell you. But I need you to sit with something for a moment first. There is a particular cruelty in the thing Margaret did. Not just the dress. The dress was almost secondary. The particular cruelty was in the years of groundwork, the subtle comments that could always be explained away, the smile that never quite reached. The way she had created a version of me, for Daniel, for their social circle, for anyone who would listen, that was lesser than, rough around the edges, bargain boutique. Doesn't understand the occasion, cold. She had been writing this story for 2 years. She had just needed one big scene to confirm it. And the person she had been relying on to help her tell that story was her own son, who loved me and believed her, and could not see what I had been looking at for 2 years. Type, she wrote the story in the comments if you understand what I mean. And stay with me, because what happened next was the best thing my mother has ever done. I walked downstairs at 3:45. The ceremony was supposed to have started at 3. The guests had been waiting. The venue coordinator had been managing questions with the professional vagueness of someone trained for exactly this. Daniel had been told there was a dress emergency and a delay. He did not yet know I was not going to marry him today. I walked into the reception hall, not the ceremony garden. That was deliberate. The reception hall was where the cocktail setup was, where guests had migrated after 45 minutes of waiting, where the bar was open and the room was full, and Margaret was standing near the window with Carol and 2 other women, champagne in hand. She saw me walk in. She saw the dress. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt. Not quite. Something more complicated. The calculation, again, of someone assessing whether the situation was still manageable. I walked to the center of the room. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I said. The room went quiet. Drinks were set down, faces turned. "I want to especially thank the people who traveled to be here. My family, my friends, the people who have shown up for me consistently and without condition. I see you, and I love you." I kept my voice even. I had spent 2 years in rooms where composure was the only weapon available to me. I knew how to use it. I need to tell you all something. And I'm going to tell it clearly because I think the people in this room deserve clarity. Margaret had not moved. This morning, someone came into my bridal suite while I was alone and deliberately damaged my wedding dress. The back seam was torn open. The sleeve was pulled from the bodice. A stain was left on the front panel. I had purchased this dress with money I saved myself over 8 months. It was repaired, as you can see, by a specialist who worked for 2 hours this afternoon, but it was damaged deliberately. And the only person who was in that room alone during that window was my future mother-in-law. A sound moved through the room, not loud. The kind of collective intake that happens when a room full of people processes something that confirms a thing they may have already suspected. I also want to tell you some other things. Because I think clarity deserves to be complete. I looked at Margaret directly. At your husband Gerald's birthday party 2 years ago, you told a neighbor I was a stray, while I was within earshot. Daniel explained it away. At your country club dinner, you told me I was brave to wear my dress color, implying I lacked the coloring to pull it off, in front of 12 guests. Daniel said you meant it as a compliment. When I chose my wedding dress, you called it a bargain boutique dress that lacked presence and said Daniel deserved a bride who understood the occasion. I know this because 2 people in this room heard you say it this morning. Carol, standing 3 feet from Margaret, looked at the floor. I chose this man, I continued. I chose him and I came here in good faith, and I tried, for 2 years, to be patient, to give time the benefit of the doubt. To believe that the version of you he described, the woman who means well, was the real one? I paused. It isn't. And I think most of you who know Margaret well already know that. Margaret's face was a mask, a very good one. But around the edges, something was showing through. I'm not going to marry Daniel today. Not because I don't love him, but because love is not enough to sustain a marriage when the person you love will not stand beside you. Every time his mother said something cruel, Daniel explained it. Every time I pointed to a pattern, he found a single data point to contradict it. Today, when I came to him and told him what happened to my dress and who I believed was responsible, he told me I needed evidence. I looked at Daniel, who had come into the room at some point and was standing near the door. I have been gathering evidence for 2 years, I said. I don't need a jury. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know what happened to my dress. I looked back at the room. I am so sorry for the disruption to your day. Please stay. Eat, drink, enjoy the venue. The catering is paid for. The bar is open. I just won't be here for it. I set the microphone down on the nearest table, and I walked out. Paige caught up to me in the parking lot. She was crying. I know, she said. I know. I should have. I've seen it for years, and I never said anything, and I'm so sorry. I stopped walking. I looked at her. Paige, who had been easy and funny and genuinely kind from the beginning, who I had thought of as a friend. Why didn't you? I asked. Because she's my mother, she said, and I was afraid of her, which is its own thing, which I'm going to have to figure out. I hugged her. I meant it. Then my mother was beside me, with my bag and my coat, and Jess was behind her with the composure of a woman who had managed crises before and would again. We drove away. What happened to Margaret Harlow after that day did not require any effort from me. That is the part I want you to understand. I did not orchestrate a campaign. I did not make calls. I did not post anything publicly or write letters or coordinate a response. What I did was tell the truth in a room full of people at a volume that everyone could hear. The rest was the natural consequence of that truth landing in the particular social ecosystem that Margaret had spent 30 years building her reputation in. Carol, it turned out, had a conscience and a long memory. She had been uncomfortable with Margaret's behavior for years and had said nothing out of social cowardice that she later described to mutual acquaintances as her greatest regret. After the wedding that wasn't, she had several conversations. She was not unkind about it. She was simply honest. About the stray comment. About the morning before the ceremony. About patterns she had witnessed over years and explained away to herself in the same way Daniel had. The country club social committee, which Margaret had chaired for 4 years, had an opening coming up. She had expected to be reappointed without question. She was not reappointed. The chair position went to someone else. No formal explanation was given. In the world Margaret operated in, formal explanations were rarely necessary. 3 of the women she had mentioned the bargain boutique comment to that morning, in the presence of witnesses, stopped calling. Not dramatically. Phones just rang less. Invitations arrived less frequently. The particular social warmth of a circle that had seemed solid revealed itself as contingent. Gerald, I heard through Paige, had a conversation with Margaret that lasted 2 hours and was not quiet. I do not know the details, and they are not mine to know. But Paige said that her father had been watching for a long time and had chosen silence for reasons of his own, and that the wedding day had been the last occasion on which he was willing to stay silent. Daniel called me 4 times in the week after. I let 3 calls go to voicemail. The 4th, I answered. He said he was sorry. He said he should have believed me. He said he had confronted his mother and she had not denied it, which was its own kind of confirmation. He said he wanted to try again if I was willing. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Daniel, I believe that you're sorry. I think you're genuinely sorry, and I think you genuinely see, now, what you couldn't see before. But I spent 2 years waiting for you to see it, and you needed my dress on the floor to get there. I can't build a life on the hope that it won't take something being destroyed for you to stand beside me. He was quiet. I don't think you're a bad person, I said. I think you love your mother, and you learned a long time ago that keeping the peace with her was easier than fighting her. I understand how that happens, but I needed you to fight for me and you didn't, not once in 2 years. And I can't forgive that, not because I'm unforgiving, but because I have to trust the person I marry to stand beside me even when it costs them something. He said, I understand. I believe he did. I moved into a new apartment 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, smaller than my old one, closer to the office. I had a bay window in the living room that got morning light, and I bought a plant for it that I have managed to keep alive for 2 years now, which feels like a legitimate accomplishment. Jess came over on moving day with wine and a very specific playlist she said was for new beginnings, and we sat on the floor among boxes until midnight, talking about everything and nothing the way you can only do with someone who has known you long enough. My mother called every Sunday. Still does. My father sent me a card that said simply, "We are proud of you." It's on my refrigerator. I went back to work. I was good at my job. I had always been good at my job. The year after the wedding, I was promoted to senior account manager and led a campaign that won a regional award, and I stood at the podium at the agency's quarterly meeting and said thank you and meant it and felt, standing there, like someone who had been building something real. I ran into Paige occasionally. We had coffee twice. She was in her own process of understanding her mother, which was complicated in the particular way that understanding a parent's flaws always is when you still love them. I did not hold Margaret against Paige. Paige had not made the choices her mother made. I did not run into Margaret. I did not expect to. That world and my world had separated cleanly. the way things do when the connection holding them together has been removed. I met Ryan at a work conference in Chicago, 18 months after the wedding. He was at the coffee station at 7:45 in the morning, squinting at the label on a packet of what turned out to be decaf with the expression of someone who had almost made a catastrophic mistake. I said, "That's the decaf. The regular is on the left." He said, "You just saved my entire morning." We talked through 2 sessions and dinner and a conversation that went until midnight in the hotel lobby and ended only because the bar was closing. He was a product manager at a tech firm in Columbus, Ohio, like me. He had a directness about him that I found immediately comfortable. He said what he meant. He remembered things. He called when he said he would. On our 4th date, I told him about Daniel and Margaret. Not as a warning or a test, but because I had learned that the right person doesn't need the story carefully edited. I told it plainly and completely. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds exhausting. I'm sorry you went through it." That was it. No analysis, no minimizing. "No, you should have done this differently." Or, "But maybe she meant well." Just, "That sounds exhausting. I'm sorry." I looked at him across the table and thought, this one. We got married on a Saturday in April, 2 years later. Small ceremony, 40 people. A restaurant with a private room and good food and a playlist Ryan made himself because he had opinions about wedding music that were genuinely interesting. I wore a dress I bought at the same boutique on 5th Street. Different dress, just as beautiful. My mother walked me in because my father had a bad knee that year and she offered and I said yes immediately. She wore blue. The specific shade Margaret had once implied was a challenge to carry. She looked extraordinary. At the dinner table, Ryan's mother Ellen sat beside my mother and they talked for 2 hours about gardening and I watched them from across the room and thought about the Japanese maple in some other backyard and the climbing roses and the woman who had spent years being told her work was a hobby. My mother was laughing. Real laughter. The full kind. Ryan found me watching them. "She's wonderful," he said. "I know," I said. He took my hand. We stayed until the last guest left, which is something I had always wanted and had not been certain I would get to have. I have thought about Margaret Harlow many times in the years since. Not obsessively, not with the sharp heat of active anger, with something more like clarity. The kind that comes after a long time of looking at something honestly. She was a woman who had built her world around a certain hierarchy, and I had arrived in it from the wrong direction. She hadn't hated me specifically. She had hated what I represented. The possibility that her son's life could be shaped by someone outside her vision for it. The inconvenience of a daughter-in-law who wouldn't shrink. The dress had been her answer to that. The final attempt to make me something that confirmed her story. A girl in a damaged bargain boutique dress, flustered and embarrassed and unequal to the occasion. She had miscalculated. Because I had spent 2 years in rooms where composure was my only weapon. I knew how to use it, and when the moment came to use it in front of 200 people, I was ready in a way she had not anticipated. She had also, I think, miscalculated Daniel. She had believed, perhaps correctly, that he would stand beside her, that his love for her and his habit of explaining her away would be enough to hold. She had not counted on the fact that explaining away a critical comment is a very different thing from explaining away a destroyed dress. That there is a threshold, even in the most accommodating love, past which the explanations simply run out. I don't think Daniel is a bad man. I think he was a son before he knew how to be a partner. I hope he figured out the difference eventually. I genuinely do. As for me, I have a kitchen table I bought with Ryan at an estate sale in Worthington. Dark wood, slightly uneven legs. A chip in one corner from the previous owners that we decided made it interesting. We eat dinner there 5 nights a week. We talk. He tells me about his day and I tell him about mine and he listens, really listens, the way I knew from the beginning that he would. No one has called me rough around the edges in years. No one has suggested that I lack the coloring for my own choices. No one has smoothed flat 520s on my table or set me at table 14 or told me I didn't understand the occasion. I am not invisible. I am not explained away. I am not manageable. I am, finally, exactly where I belong. From a psychological perspective, what Margaret did over 2 years has a name. It is called relational aggression. The use of social manipulation, reputation damage, and subtle humiliation as tools of control, typically employed in environments where direct aggression would be socially unacceptable. It is most common, research suggests, among people who have significant social capital to protect and who have learned that plausible deniability is their most reliable shield. The particular cruelty of relational aggression is that it requires witnesses to gaslight you. It depends on the people closest to you being uncertain enough about what they're seeing that they offer explanations instead of validation. Margaret was very good at this. She had practiced it for a long time. What ended it was not my anger. Anger alone doesn't dismantle this kind of thing. What ended it was precision. Naming specific events, specific dates, specific words, in front of specific witnesses, at a moment when there was no longer any social benefit to looking away. The truth, told plainly and completely, is still the most effective tool available. If you have a Margaret in your life, I want you to know something. You are not imagining it. The list you keep in your head, the one you return to when you start to doubt yourself, that list is real. Trust it. You don't have to wait for the dress on the floor. You can draw the line before it gets there. But if you've already seen the dress on the floor, if you're already standing in the hallway holding the evidence of something you were told couldn't possibly be real, then you know what I know. You know what composure is for, and you know what it can do. That's my story. I want to hear yours. Have you ever been in a room with someone who made you invisible and had to decide whether to say something? Have you ever stood in a moment where you finally had enough? Tell me in the comments. Type, I trust the list, or I saw the dress. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. I share stories like this every week, and if you know someone who needs to hear this one today, send it to them. Thank you for being here until the end.